Gulf between the reserve banks on either side of the Tasman is even wider today as New Zealand raised its official interest rates for the second time in 2 months and promised there are more rate rises to come. Business Editor Ross Greenwood joins me. Ross, this of course comes as our RBA maintains its policy of keeping rates close to zero for at least another 12 months.
Yeah, that's right, Kieran. And really what you can see is that there is actually a difference in the policy between the two central banks, though they are close and economically they're very similar. But in New Zealand, what's happened is that they are going to raise rates and continue to raise rates in the face of rising inflation. They've also been one of the very first to raise it. So if you go back into October, rates there were 0.5%. Here, of course, sitting at 0.25%. They raised them in October, raised them again in November. So literally in the space of 2 months, they've gone from 0.25% to 0.75%. Now, still very, very low, but it's a situation whereby you've now got a situation whereby the New Zealand Reserve Bank has really got quite a different attitude, almost ahead of many central banks around the world. So let's go to the Reserve Bank Governor of New Zealand today as he explained the reasons for this change.
The near-term rise in inflation has been accentuated by higher oil prices, rising transport costs and the impacts of the global supply shortfalls. These immediate relative price shocks risk generating more generalised price inflation, especially given the current domestic capacity constraints. In summary, the committee noted that further removal of monetary policy stimulus is expected over time, given the medium-term outlook for inflation and employment.
So, Ross, fundamentally, talk us through the difference between the two central banks. How are they seeing things so differently?
Well, I get a sense maybe that New Zealand feels as though the inflation that is there, they expect inflation to be above 5%, that they believe is now going to be baked in, and especially because of higher oil prices. Of course, emergency reserves of oil were released by the United States overnight. The second aspect from New Zealand is also that while Australia, I feel, believes that it can actually almost populate its way out of the inflation issue, borders reopen, as a result, more workers come in, that takes pressure off wages and hopefully therefore prices. I get a sense that there's a difference in attitude there as well. The interesting part you heard from Adrian Orr there, the Reserve Bank Governor of New Zealand, was that they expect more rate rises to come. Now, the markets are actually factoring them by this time next year. The official rate in New Zealand will have risen from where it is today, 0.75% to 2.5%. But at the same time, the Reserve Bank here is still quite adamant. It wants to keep interest rates at that 0.25% low mark, or between 0 and 0.25%, until the end of next year. The money markets here, however, believe that our Reserve Bank will be pressured eventually into raising rates as New Zealand has done.
Today, the Deputy Governor has reiterated the view that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin have no place for making payments in the future, Ross.
Yep, absolutely. So this is Michele Bullock, and she's come out at a payments conference today and effectively said that she won't even call them cryptocurrencies because she doesn't believe that they're currencies. Crypto assets is what she calls them. And so as a result, she's also saying that not only are they highly volatile and people could lose money from them, but she doesn't ever believe that they will have any part in terms of actual payments in Australia or other major developed nations. The one thing she does say, though, is that central banks themselves could issue their own stable coins, as they're sometimes called. In other words, they have control of the cryptocurrency, and that will be the thing that ultimately people might use. So again, the Reserve Bank is quite adamant that crypto has no place really in Australia at this stage.
Finally, the ASX has had conditions imposed on its licence to operate. Of course, it did have that major outage last year, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It was October last year when the ASX was pretty much put out of action for a whole day as a result of IT issues. Now, this is untenable. They have a capital markets that simply doesn't operate. Now, today at a conference, Joe Longo, who is the new chair of ASIC, the corporate COP, effectively announced that there was going to be these conditions placed upon the ASX's licence and said the imposition of these licence conditions will confirm that remedial actions are implemented appropriately. The important thing about the ASX to remember also is that for a couple of years now, it's been trying to create a new system whereby people have a platform using blockchain, the same technology that's behind the cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. That is way overdue, and it's still no sign of it coming. And so really part of this is about trying to make certain that that whole system is robust for investors into the future.